Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Climate Action Plan progress reports. Now we're going to hear from the big institutions about what exactly they're doing about climate change. We've heard earlier on from individuals what they're doing about climate change. First of all, can we start with a word from Eddie Weir, who's president of the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists, just for a quick hello.
Welcome everyone for joining us at what is the last session of this year's Future Build at the main stage arena. CIAT is delighted to be hosting this event for the second consecutive year. This event is a clear demonstration that we as professions are keen to work together and not, as some would want us to believe, be protectionist or work in isolation. It's extremely important that we recognise that genuine professional collaboration is key to building communities for the future. We would like to thank Future Build for supporting CIAT in this venture, and for the Edge for the critically important work it has undertaken to ensure that we take action now to mitigate against the climate emergency. As professionals, we have a duty to give back, and as professional bodies, we have a duty to society. These obligations on us, together with our professional codes of conduct and our moral and ethic responses, provide us with the focus and drive to take the Climate Action Plan forward and deliver for the future generations who will follow us. I hope you enjoy the discussions this afternoon, and I look forward to the successful outcomes that our shared collaborations will bring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, to give this event some context, I'd like to ask Simon Foxhill from the Edge to step forward and say in one sentence what the Edge is, and in a second sentence the challenge that was set down by the Edge to these luminaries in the front row a short while ago.
Thank you, Roger. The Edge is a collaboration between all the disciplines in the built environment. We were set up 24 years ago to try to cement relationships between all the institutions in the industry, and we've been doing that ever since, and with, we hope, some success. This particular event has its roots in a series of events we led in 2014, which led to the publication of this report, Collaboration for Change, in 2015, that recommended that the institutions collaborate a good deal more, as the title suggests, and in particular, it should really collaborate around climate change, as this was a challenge that they couldn't do on their own, and we need to tackle as an industry in total. As part of that work, we convened a round table in June last year, hosted by the RIBA, which we invited 10 institutions to attend. Ultimately, 25 institutions came, and together they promised, as part of a declaration that came out of that, to collaborate together on formulating a climate action plan, and to do that in conjunction with the Committee on Climate Change, the government's advisor on dealing with climate change. Since then, we've had a series of meetings with them. The agenda's been picked up and taken forward by the umbrella body, the Construction Industry Council. And today we set them as a target for coming back and reporting to the wider industry, to the public, how far they got with their joint planning for taking us to net zero by 2050. That's the entire built environment in this country. We prepared an outline plan as part of the preparation for this, in which we split up the immense task of doing that into 10 different sectors. And we have agreement from different clusters of the institutions that represent our industry, and there are huge numbers of them, to work together to tackle that part of the challenge, that part of the problem. Out of that 10, today we've invited 4 groups representing 4 of those challenges to come and talk to you, to say how far they've got with their part of the plan. And in general, there'll be 2 institutions talking to each sector. One of the institutions isn't here today. They've had to drop out because of advice on the coronavirus, but we still got 7 speakers today who we hope will tackle this. Finally, copies of the original Collaboration for Change report, which were reprinted in a second edition with a new introduction by the author, are available in boxes here. And thank you very much to ACO, who sponsored that republication.
So the challenge has been clearly laid down, and in order to demonstrate this new spirit, when I say new, I don't know whether it's new or not, this spirit of cooperation, people are going to come up in pairs and present their findings in pairs. So I have to say, I'm going now to read you a dull list of institutions, but it's kind of important, okay? So we're going to hear from the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists, the Chartered Association of Building Engineers, the Institution of Civil Engineers, the Royal Town Planning Institute, who can't come because they think they'll get sick, the Landscape Institute, the Society for the Environment, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and the Institution of Structural Engineers. I think that's pretty impressive. And there's loads of others who didn't come. So first of all, kicking us off, is going to be on the subject of standards and regulations. I invite to the stage, or re-invite, Eddie Weir from the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists and his new partner for the day, Gavin Dunn, Chief Executive of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers.
Thank you again. So just a wee bit about what CIAT has done first of all. So we have signed up to the overarching CIC statement on climate and biodiversity emergency. In tandem with that, the CIAT climate change policy will form the backbone of our climate change action plan. And the plan covers CIAT as a working office, CIAT as a professional institute in the work that it does in its education, standards, practice, technical aspects of developing the discipline in our professional body. It covers CIAT as a provider of advice and guidance to members, potential members, clients, employers. It covers maintaining standards of our professional conduct, all our events and accredited CPDs. It covers a whole suite of our prestigious AT awards and our policy documents and position statements. To achieve net zero carbon by 2050 or 2030, as is considered a feasible necessity, a revision of legislation, regulations and standards is required as a matter of urgency to support the professions. It is important that we expedite appropriate increased minimum standards within our building regulations, but refocus on enhanced and improved standards within public procurement and government projects, because they could be changed immediately through enhanced performance specifications and lead the way as an exemplar client. Enhanced standards should not just be for the environmentally conscious. As professionals, we should be advocating these to our clients now and not waiting on the cumbersome time on consuming consultation processes and regulations to be completed. We need to revisit our UK VAT laws to offer incentives for new technologies and retrofits. And the key issues regarding procurement and tendering must be reinforced to ensure quality is guaranteed and not just best price. Sub-economic tendering, or the race to the bottom, is a scourge in our construction industry. There is a saying that you can only put into a job based on what you're being paid. Whether you're providing a service or construction, once the resources run out, then so does the quality. If we are to meet the standards, we can only achieve them by ensuring that we have a sustainable and ethical construction industry. Design, planning, construction should focus on fabric-first approach and ensure the use of modern methods of construction. But most importantly, we need to ensure that we make the best use of our data to measure the performance to ensure that the industry is actually achieving zero net carbon and completion in use. I am confident that if we tackle these issues together, we can achieve these targets.
Good afternoon. I'm Gavin Dunn from the Chartered Association of Building Engineers. And I'm working alongside colleagues from other institutions. We have taken a much more dramatic, more ambitious route forward in regard to the climate emergency. For the Chartered Association, that means 3 key areas of activity. First, and actually the first 2 are us on our own. The first is getting our own house in order and putting our own organisation en route to being a zero carbon professional body. The second is also something we lead the way on with our own members in terms of embedding sustainability and ethicals requirements into our professional standards for our members, both enabling our members to do the right thing, but also very clearly making a negligent practice resulting in environmental damage a disciplinary matter within our association. And we do hope other professional bodies adopt similar approaches. The third area is where the real collaboration comes with other bodies. Our members are involved in the application of regulations and standards. And that is an area we're now leading, both in terms of supporting government with regulation, but also collaboration with the other groups within the EDGE framework to identify the gaps in research, in knowledge and skills to enable those development of regulations and standards to be more effective. In terms of regulations and standards recently, we've contributed considerably to the proposed updates to the Part L of the building regulations and the proposed future home standard, but also retrofit standards like the PAS 2030 and PAS 2035. The work of the new group under EDGE, we're looking to coordinate that activity in a much more meaningful way ahead of the COP26 conference in, was it COP25, in November, looking at what it is needed for government to make the regulations move forward in a meaningful way, but what are the standards required? What are the knowledge gaps needed so that, as Eddie quite rightly said, non-regulatory standards can be adopted immediately? And I think a key to that is we're hoping to do a piece around guidance for procurement aimed at clients to help them understand what they can do today, what they can do this year in the procurement of better, more sustainable, lower carbon buildings. So it's a very brave new world, and for those of us who have been fighting this agenda for many years, we welcome the urgency and we welcome the collaboration across the industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Gavin, can I just ask you a quick question? This is one that came up in one of the other panels as well. So you're looking at what we could do today. You walk out of our little enclave here and you see 50 different stands, each one saying that their product is the best. How on earth do we make a choice? And can we fairly make a choice based on current knowledge, given what we're expecting to see in 20, 30 years' time? And how will we be able to measure the performance without waiting for it?
Yep. Unfortunately, from my perspective, our industry is led by this culture where we build to the minimum. The building regulations, those are the minimum standards we were expected to build to. We have various standards, both holistic building standards and individual product standards, which are voluntary, and actually the UK is very strong on this. We've led the way in sustainability standards with things like BREEAM. We've got a whole group looking at Passive House. There are standards above regulatory standards which clients can specify today that will get them a higher performance, even if they don't understand the detail about how to build that higher performance. And that becomes, to me, it becomes an important conduit between sort of clients who don't understand the detail of buildings, but an industry being able to gear up to provide a higher level of performance. Unfortunately, our culture today remains build to the minimum building regulations and hope you get there sometimes.
Right, let me just ask you another quick question, which also came up earlier. I was talking to an architect friend the other day. He was very exercised because he'd just put up a new office building, which was far, far more efficient to run than the office building that they had knocked down and replaced. But he said because of all the embodied carbon in the new building, it would take 90 years before it had paid back the extra efficiency gains in terms of carbon. And his view was that there should be a presumption under planning regulations against knocking down buildings unless you can prove that they are absolutely impossible to refurbish. Do you have a view on that?
I think he's right to be worried. One of the key knowledge gaps and one of the research gaps and one of the data gaps that we're very worried about is embodied carbon. And particularly as we move to much higher performing buildings operationally, there is a danger that we actually create buildings that have greater climate impacts because of the embodied impacts in the build process. There are standards that use life cycle carbon assessment as part of that design process, but also it highlights the need to really look at refurbishment standards, because good, high quality, low carbon refurbishment generally does involve lower cost and lower overall carbon than knocking down and rebuilding. But there are sort of confidence gaps in that space, and a lot of it comes down to data.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll do a chat on this on air at some point. That's really interesting. Thank you. Okay, the next duo are, well, actually this is a duo without a partner because they fear getting sick. The next duo is Ed McCann, Vice President from the Institution of Civil Engineers, with his missing half, the RTPI.
Whoops, there we are. So thank you. Don't know what I've done. Yeah, I'm actually going to read out something because Ian couldn't join us, and keen that he shared it. So Ian is from the Royal Town Planning Institute, and the subject we were talking about was transport and infrastructure, and the focus has been on transport and land use. Anyway, so Ian said, I want to start by framing the challenge that we face in addressing climate change within the sphere of land use and transport. The evidence shows that while carbon production from energy, space heating and industry is either stabilising or reducing, the carbon footprint from transport is largely unchanged over the past decade. As built environment professions, we need therefore to redouble our efforts to tackle this problem. In many ways, the required actions are nothing new. Since the 2008 Climate Change Act, our local planning authorities have been meant to produce planning policies in their local plans that reduce energy use and the carbon footprint. Policies on sustainable development should therefore already be tackling this issue. In the past decade, however, we have continued to allocate developments and grant planning permissions for new homes, businesses and facilities in relatively remote locations, whilst our related transport policies, oh dear, the screen's just turned off. Bear with me a sec. Yeah, there it is, back in. Sorry, Ian. While our related transport policies are focused more on tackling congestion than on reducing carbon footprint as such. We haven't succeeded yet in persuading the public that there is a real need to get out of the petrol and diesel-driven car. We therefore need governments to take a more stringent approach to the allocation and permitting of development to ensure that it takes place in accessible locations where homes, jobs, services and infrastructure can be reached by zero carbon and low carbon modes of travel. Local planning authorities can do more to focus on this, but our governments need to step up the pressure on local authorities to do so and provide them with the resources to be able to do the job. For those journeys where walking and cycling can't fulfil needs, we then need to focus on achieving low carbon travel modes, recognising the challenges in energy production and storage and in urban design to equip our homes and businesses with the necessary charging technology. Excuse me. Thank you, Ian. So what Ian's doing there is he's basically framing the RTPI analysis of the problem relating to carbon and transport in terms of land use. And that sort of keys nicely into my sort of piece, which is we've been asked to talk about what we can do, will do as professional institutions individually and as a group. And I think it's probably quite important that we understand what a professional institution can do and by inference what it can't do, because we're not, we're not descended from heaven on a cloud with the answer to the world's problems. But what we do all generally have are three levers that we variously pull. So the professional institutions typically inform politicians and the public. So they develop and knowledge that allows them to do that. And what Ian was talking about there was a position that the RTPI have developed, which they will influence the politicians about in future, and indeed are already doing so. So the first one is influence the politicians and the public. Second, we develop knowledge and good practice, regulations, specifications, standards in our respective areas of expertise. In a sense, we write the recipe book for how things are done. So we say how buildings are put together. No one else tells you how to put buildings. It's our constituent members who decide what practice looks like. And thirdly, we develop and assure the skills and attitudes of our members. So we qualify people to make sure they know what they're doing, but we also set the framework of learning that they operate in. So those are our three levers. We can't write checks, but we can write do those three things. And as an example how RPTI and ICE are doing this in relation to transport, climate change and other things, we're going to have a look at a couple of slides. So in terms of the first lever, on the left-hand side you see a recent production. This was 2018, RTPI produced this guidance document for planning, which is called Rising to the Climate Crisis. Actually, now, it seems like a long time ago, 9 years ago, the Institution of Civil Engineers did a fairly major piece of work looking at a route to a low-carbon infrastructure, which is done under a chap called Tim Chapman, produced that. We had a big committee, did lots of research. It ended up in a government document in 2014, which was, if you like, a sort of roadmap to low-carbon infrastructure, which completely disappeared, and in the sense that it didn't grab a purchase. And it's worth remembering sometimes that timing is the art of good comedy, because they weren't interested then, they are interested now. And then on the right-hand side, this was an attempt the ICE made a couple of years ago to engage with the public through something called it was a sort of superhero campaign, trying to get the public to understand what, in this case, civil engineers did. So we attempt to influence politicians, public, through this sort of stuff. On the next slide, how do I do that? Hey. Right, next one. So this is in the developing knowledge, good practice and regulations. So for example, on the left-hand side, that document on renewable energy is produced by the RTPI, and it tells people how to develop and implement renewable energy strategies through the planning framework. So this is them effectively articulating how do we do this for their members and for planning authorities. In the middle, and I can see it down here, yes, there's another one that they did, which is guidance to planning authorities on how to decide about location. Is this a good location by considering transport links and so on? Underneath that is an old engineer who did Tower Bridge, John Wolfe Barry, who was a president of the Institution of Civil Engineers and gave birth to, if you can do that, as a president of the ICE, to the British Standards Institute in 1901. And so the institution, in a sense, created the framework of standards that said, if it's steel, it looks like this. If it's a beam, it looks like this. And then on the right-hand side, that is the ICE specification for the sexy subject of embedded retaining walls. But if you open that up, that will tell you how to specify retaining walls. If you want low-carbon retaining walls, you've got to put it in there. And it's got to have a seal on the front which says, whoever institution says so. So that's the second thing we do. And then the third set is an example, developing and assuring the skills and attitudes of our members. And we all, more or less, or many of us, do the things on that list. So we influence the pre-18 curriculum. In the case of the ICE, we do that through the Royal Academy of Engineering and their programs, and through the Engineering Council and their programs. We accredit engineering institutions, so we say, if you want to call this a civil engineering degree, you've got to have these things on your curriculum and you've got to teach them. I'll talk a little bit about these in a moment, and then we do initial professional qualification, so we make sure that everybody is learning and developing their skills. We do professional qualification, we do continued professional development, and we run specialist registers and qualifications. All of these effectively define the skills and competence of our members, and all of the institutions, to a greater or lesser extent, do those things. In answer to the question, what are we doing about it? Well, from an ICE perspective, and I can only really speak for ourselves, is we're just pulling the levers harder, because we've been doing this for a while. And so, for instance, we are currently, with the IStructE and a couple of other institutions, currently redefining the output standards of engineering programs so that the top line says design for climate change and carbon. so that in short order, the universities will be requiring their students to study and to develop competence at a university level in that subject. And so that's happening now. We're reviewing our initial professional development so that it's more explicit. At the moment we talk about sustainability. There'll be specific and deliberate reference to low carbon design and awareness of climate issues and the relationships therein. We're also looking at professional qualification, so when they turn up, are they good to go? We're training our reviewers and the accreditation panels so that they have the skills to enable them to tell, because a lot of people who do that sort of thing won't necessarily have those skills themselves. And we're exploring the use of specialist registers and qualification around things at the moment, to be honest, including competence for life-critical design. You're going to see some of that stuff on Grenfell. We're looking at it on major infrastructure, bridges and so on, so you can only do it if you have a specialist qualification. And we're exploring the idea of specialism in low-carbon design. To enable that sort of stuff to it. So those are our three levers. Those are the what we can do in that space, and that's a very brief canter through sort of thing at the moment that the IC and RTPI are trying to do.
Brilliant, thank you. Just hang on a sec, won't you? And I'm just being a cynical journalist here, but if I look at an institution called the Institution of Civil Engineers, it tells me that they want to do civil engineering. What if the other option is not do civil engineering? That means no fees for your people. So I'm thinking, for instance, on one of your slides, it said, how will we add a new runway at Heathrow? Well, you know, it's debatable whether or not we can add a new runway at Heathrow without busting our carbon targets. I just wonder about that.
Well, what's the question?
The question is, do you or do you not have a predisposition towards building stuff as a solution to a problem?
I think it's probably fair to say that most people in the industry do have a predilection towards building stuff. A key motivator for people who get into this space is the glory of standing in front of something that they helped create and feeling good about that. In my sort of space, there is, roughly speaking, there are three primary motivations for people becoming civil engineers in rough thirds. One of them is to save the world. So you get a lot of people get into civil engineering because they want to do irrigation schemes, to do sanitation schemes and so on. Roughly a third want to problem solve, and they don't really care what the problem solving is, so they're sort of analytical personalities who like the challenge of solving problems. And then roughly a third are avid builders who want to build stuff. And so that is a cultural challenge, and it's not just the civil engineers, actually it'll be architects, it'll be a lot of people in our sector have as one of the motivations the desire to build. But it's also true to say that a lot of people have the desire to make the world a better place. And that's the bit we need to grow and maybe try and help people to build in a different way.
Because we were just talking earlier on about would it be better to refurbish a building in carbon terms? And obviously, I suggest it will probably be less satisfying to refurbish something than it is to build something new. I remember doing a program about big dams in India and Pakistan and building new big dams, and there were 100 existing big dams that were being insufficiently repaired and maintained and were not functioning properly, yet the country was still building more big dams.
Yeah, well, we've got a Prime Minister who loves a project. Now, everyone loves a project. Everyone loves it not being there, and now it's there, and I did it. And it's not as satisfying for many people to do the other.
That's a real challenge for an institution like yours.
Well, I think actually the institution is agnostic on it, in the sense that the institution's obligation is to make sure that people are skilled and qualified and equipped and motivated to give society the infrastructure it needs for civilized life. If society says, I want zero carbon versions of that, it's our job to enable our participants to do that. And if that means a cultural realignment, then that's what we're going to have to do. And it is a challenge, but it's also true to say that lots of people find complex cut and carve intensely fascinating. You know, there are no people in this room who have taken buildings apart, put them back together again, and it's intellectually really challenging and quite satisfying. And so there is a way of recasting the challenge, which is more motivational. We recently did Selfridges, and it was delicious to think we were putting a massive beam underneath people walking around. Literally, we jacked the building up. They're walking around buying their shoes, and they didn't know we were there. and hundreds of people beavering away underneath making stuff happen is quite satisfying as well. But that is undoubtedly an issue. And I think it's much more, actually, if I was honest, or not honest, if I was frank about it, I think it's more the business models of the organisations they work for need to build. So the business model around building is more of a challenge to the individual attitudes, I would say. I think quite a lot of people could get a lot of satisfaction out of not building, but the corporations, it's quite a challenge. If you're not building stuff, what are you doing? Anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. Just out of interest, how many people in the audience have heard the phrase cut and carve before? Yeah, well, what a dunce I am. Right, now the next duet, Adam White, the President of the Landscape Institute, and Will Pope, Chair of the Society for the Environment, are going to present on adaptation and resilience.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, my name's Adam White, and I'm the President of the Landscape Institute, Chartered Landscape Architect, and I'm a Director of Davis White Landscape Architects. And Andre Davis is down here, my business partner. So I've been president for the past 2 years now, and when I came in, one of the big things was collaboration, was talking to the industry. Along with Will and lots of other organisations, we've been working together to find out where we've got a shared interest. And one of the shared interests is about how we connect people, place and nature, how we can work with influential figures to raise the profile of our profession and shared professions to make a huge difference, because we need to get the children of the future to buy into what we're all here to do today. And that includes lots of different people. I got to meet Al Gore, and you've all seen, if you haven't seen, Where Have You Been? The Inconvenient Truth. But most importantly is his climate reality project. And I got to talk to him about how in the UK our profession can support that mission. And then more recently, if you got to attend the Landscape Institute Awards last year, we had Sir David Attenborough join us. He was made an honorary Landscape Institute member and was given a Lifetime Achievement Award. And in April the 16th, a premiere of a film called A Life on Our Planet is being shown at the Royal Albert Hall, but it's been screened all over the UK in cinemas, and I strongly advise you to watch it. He gave me a real insight into what that film's about, and it's exactly what we're discussing here today. And then more recently, I got to work with Prince Charles. He was the man behind getting our industry to collaborate and create a biosecurity toolkit. That's available on the internet. You can Google it and download it. If you're in our profession, please do have a look. It is a really, really useful asset. And if you've not seen any of those, or you've not heard about what the Landscape Institute and landscape architects and professionals are doing, we're about to launch what I'm calling the Netflix of the landscape profession, the iPlayer for the Landscape Institute, and we'll have all the different events, training, CPDs, all on there. You can click on and you can watch them. It's going to be really useful. I mean, look at how many people are here today. How many people have chosen not to be here today for lots of different reasons. If this is being filmed, we can upload it and share it to a much wider audience. So it was last June that the Landscape Institute decided to declare the climate crisis and biodiversity emergency. And there are a number of different elements in that, and I won't go through them all. You can see them there. They are on our website now, and it's really important, and collaboration was a really key thing. And to make sure our members and the new graduates, I was at the CMLI graduation last night, and we had 90 new chartered members join us. It's making sure they have got the skills to know how to collaborate, where to get the right information, and have the tools to create a resilient landscape. There it is. And just before Christmas, we had our key asks of the government, and we've been lobbying central government, talking to George Eustace and talking to Michael Gove and a number of other senior figures about how I believe, and we believe, that landscape architects are the superheroes of tomorrow to change and adapt. Now, there are three different areas. The one thing I've been talking about as a landscape architect is design, is how can we design solutions before we even start. And I think one of the key things is climate positive design. There are so many different ways as a designer you can think of what are the options. And the Climate Positive Design website is a tool. It's an American tool, but it kind of works for us here. And also the difference in adaptation and mitigation. They're two different things, and I don't think everybody quite gets their head around them. That one is about addressing the root problem, but the other is how we can address the impacts of them, to mitigate a problem and to adapt. And then this is a piece of artwork that was created at our awards last year. So what I thought I'd do is share a case study project. This is the President's Award. This is the one I chose. It is Conswater Greenway in East Belfast, and it both mitigates and adapts. Our members have been in an amazing position. Actually, the work we do doesn't have a huge impact if you looked at the bigger industry, but actually the possibilities of what our members can do is huge to try and address this challenge. And this project is a green finger that runs into the city. The two landscape architects ran it's a bit like the Highline Plant of the Week blog. They did a similar thing to get the community to share images and ideas about what they'd been working, and it was published in a book, and it also went into a calendar. It's fantastic. Another huge collaboration is what Andre and I did for the last year, and that was working with the NHS and with the RHS and with Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cambridge on the Back to Nature garden. And this is why it's interesting. I thought I'd share you, because this is a show garden, and you could have a whole debate around the RHS shows. Are they sustainable? Are they worth doing? Well, this project was a real case study because we upcycled and recycled absolutely every element of it. And the tree house here is going into Gosford Forest in Northern Ireland, and the rest of it went to RHS Wisley, to a new children's garden there. These are just 4 of the gardens at Chelsea this year that have been designed by landscape architects. And they're all about addressing the climate crisis, biodiversity emergency, and plant health. This doesn't normally happen at one of the most famous shows in the world. They're normally exclusive private gardens. These 4 are public pocket parks. The top left one there is in East London. So it's great. We've got to use the vehicles that already exist to tackle and address the wider issue, and that is talk to society out there. We already know what's going on in here, but there are still a lot of skeptics out there, so we need to use our voice to influence them. One thing I want to really do in my last few months as president is try and inspire the next generation of landscape architects that come in to make sure they've got the right skills. And I believe that plants are one of the big solutions to ensure that we can design plant communities for resilient landscapes. And what we're going to start doing through our training, through our CPD, is doing that both online, so there'll be webinars, and in person to make sure that the skills are out there. We've also got a conference in Birmingham, which is all around this subject, coming soon, and of course our awards will address it. We're going to record the CPD, we've never done this before, online, to make sure our members are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then this is the conference that's taking place. Finally, I'm just going to finish now. Can't go without saying a little bit about Greta Thunberg. And I was at the IFLA World Congress. That's the International Federation of Landscape Architects. They have come to the Landscape Institute, and a lot of those professional bodies are mentioned to ask us what we're doing in the UK. Around the world, there's a lot of countries that are way behind us and not having these debates. And this is the next climate strike, and I believe we should be supporting these children because they are the superheroes. And if we can show them there's a career, whatever that career is, there's a place for them to go and study and learn. And there's our youngest one, only a few weeks old. And it's gone global. 25 different countries around the world have adopted the Choose Landscape campaign to inspire the next generation to choose landscape. If you've never seen this before and you're interested in getting in it, it's called RHS Green Planet. 10-week program going into secondary schools for 10 days, and you inspire the children and they design a space from inception to completion. They're always looking for mentors. You don't have to be a landscape architect or a landscape professional. You can be from anybody in this room can get involved. We have to do our bit and get that next generation. Because as I say, we've got some skeptics out there. We are not in here maybe, I hope not. But out there are, and I think this is a really important slide to show what we can do if we collaborate together. So, sorry, there is the journal. It's the last one that's just come out. If anybody wants a copy, let me know. It is all around what we're discussing today. Come and grab me in a wee while. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam, and good afternoon, everybody. As Roger introduced us, my name is Will Pope, and I'm an environmentalist. Feels like I'm at an Alcoholics Anonymous, doesn't it? But, you know, when I graduated in environmental science in 1976, I know I was considered to be an oddball. It wasn't normal, if you like. I can tell you some great stories about that, but I've only been given 3 minutes, so I won't.
But what I'm going to talk to you about now builds on Adam's presentation, but all those we've heard so far around the normalization of professional environmentalism and then sustainability through that environmental professionalism. So what we're really about as the Society for the Environment, of which I'm chair and speaking to you on behalf of today, is about collaboration between the professions and how important the environmental core, if you like, is to run through all professions. And this is a journey we're on, to be fair. It's not a completed journey. A little bit about the Society for the Environment to start off. We got our Royal Charter in 2004. We were established in 1999 as a working group of 10 professional bodies who chose to work together to advance, if you like, and maintain a high level of environmental professionalism. So we got our Royal Charter in 2004, and actually that says that what we're for is the dissemination of knowledge of and education in good environmental practice for the benefit of the public. Actually, we do that through our professional bodies, which are actually called our members. We don't have individual members, but professional bodies are our members. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We're very similar to the Engineering Council, the Science Council. Society of the Environment is the same sort of body. We actually have 24 professional bodies within our membership now. They've got a collective individual membership of about, well, in excess of 500,000, and we have registered over 10,000 chartered environmentalists. We've got 7,500 still on the register, and that's growing every year. We offer two professional registrations, chartered environmentalist and registered environmental technician. We've got a new one coming, registered environmentalist. The issue here for people who are aware of these things is chartered environmentalist is like chartered engineer is analogous to what's called a level 7 qualification. Registered environmental technician is level 4. We'll introduce a level 5 or 6 registered environmentalists this year. These are our 24 current members who have collectively the 500,000 professions, and with whom and through whom we collaborate together to maintain the standard, the professional standard, which is required to deliver sustainability through the environmental professions. And of course you've heard from some of these organisations today already. A few statistics, as I've said, we've got over 7,500 chartered environmentalists on our register at the moment, or on the registers of our constituent professional bodies. 45% of our new registrants in 2018 were female, which is great. So we think that we're doing our bit on the journey to equality and diversity, if you like. Our average age is falling, and we have registrants in about 80 countries, about 15% of our membership. We know that there are, and you've heard a lot about it today, the multi-professional impacts of development are widespread, but we believe, and I'll finish very quickly with this one, Roger, that the power of professionalism and partnerships and collaboration is so important. We have 3 core beliefs: that decisions should be made by those with competence, and so we want environment in every decision, and we want a CM, the Chartered Environmentalist, on every board. We believe that environmental professionals work in every profession, and we genuinely are committed to the belief that actually we won't solve the environmental challenges of today by working in professional silos. Could talk to you more about our pledge to net zero, the environmental policy forum that we run, and our strategic environment council, but there's more on our website and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. No questions, because it sounds like it's on the website. So I will ask forward the next duo, which is Alan Vallance, the CEO of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and Mike Crook, the Climate Emergency Lead of the Institution of Structural Engineers.
Oh, it's your slides. Ah. Sorry, folks, that was a bit unexpected. I should say that I'm not Alan Vallance. I'm thinking of asking for a pay rise, but I'm Adrian Dobson, and I work for the Royal Institute of British Architects. And Mike and I have asked me to talk a little bit about the work we're doing together on energy and embodied carbon. But I thought just I'd start by telling you a little bit about the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge. We've introduced the Climate Challenge to really try and help our members meet the ambition of a net zero or better whole life carbon for new and deep retrofit buildings by 2030. It sets out very specific target figures. We're looking at operational energy demand being reduced by at least 75% before offsetting, and embodied carbon being reduced by at least 50%, and also our water consumption by around 40%. And at the request of the Climate Change Committee, we've also asked our practices to make a commitment to making no new connections to the gas grid on new build and retrofit projects. I think the point to make is we use this diagram to explain the kind of stepped targets, and it's just to say that what we call the deep green area, the projects that meet all those targets already, that is already achievable. The very best practice already meets that target. So although this is a huge challenge for the industry, it's not impossible by any means. For each of the areas, we set very specific stepped targets. They've been developed in association with the Committee on Climate Change and also the Green Construction Board. But because the theme today is collaboration, the main point I wanted to make is this is to try and help our members to play their part, but they can't do it alone. And the actual methodologies and the benchmarks that we use are not RIBA benchmarks. So for example, in terms of energy consumption, we use Chartered Institute of Building Surveying, Building Services Engineers benchmarks, or alternatively Passive House. In terms of the embodied carbon targets, we use the RICS standard on embodied carbon. So these are industry-wide standards and methodologies that we're trying to adopt. We have them both for domestic buildings and actually a similar set of targets for non-domestic buildings. So if you're not aware of the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge, I'd just encourage you to go on the RIBA website and take a look at it. You'll also be able to see their details of our Home for 2030 competition that we've just launched on behalf of UK Government and Homes England, which is all about zero carbon, age-friendly homes. So that's something else you can also see on the website. The theme, though, is very much today about collaboration. And so I thought I'd just use the slide here which shows the RIBA Plan of Work. There's a new version of the Plan of Work, actually just came out last week. And this is a framework that's used right across the construction industry, and it's got actually a whole suite of sustainability strategies that go with it now. But I think at the end of our slot, Mike and I are just going to talk about the work that the iStruct-E and the RIBA are trying to do together, because we're very conscious that about a third of embodied carbon is in the structural elements of a building. And so clearly that collaboration between architects and structural engineers is very important, and getting that collaboration going right at the early part of this plan of work process, not leaving it too late. I should say, I'm standing in front of a very good example of non-collaboration. I think what you can see here is a very elegant-looking cantilever podium, and it's actually held up with a huge scaffolding pole, so it probably tells us something about the need to integrate. So iStruct-E and RIBA, we're committed to working together on developing shared standards, common assessment processes, and CPD. And as I say, this most important thing of all, getting our members to work together early on in the process, not leaving it too late. With that, I'm going to hand over to Mike. Okay. Right. Thanks very much, Adrian. It's true. This is about collaboration. It's really good to be on a stand where RIBA and iStruct-E are talking about the same thing and how we're going to be working and are working together to improve the situation. Now, my slide, I decided to say construction's lethal legacy.
Sorry about that, a bit dramatic, but I'm feeling like that. We in the construction industry have, in the quest to improve people's lives and use the resources at our disposal, unwittingly have created quite a substantial legacy that we all need to get together and do something about. It's been quite a cost. Now, if I can move on, what I think we need to do across the building environment is do something that we haven't really been doing nearly enough. In my experience working with the institutions, particularly iStruct, there isn't enough engagement but across the institutions, helping each other, agreeing to share resources even, and have a common vision as to what we're trying to achieve. I really think we're at that point where we can say, and certainly helped by CIC and EDGE, at that point where we start to understand it's crucial that we get together and do things together. And of course, we know, however you cut the cake, construction, the built environment, has a huge part to play in creating and now in resolving the issues of the climate emergency. Quickly, in the iStruct, we've taken this very seriously. The institution immediately got on board the declaration of climate emergency by structural engineering firms, set up a conference so we could share actions and needs, and took from that conference its own plan, created its own plan. The simple way of explaining that plan is recognize that we're about setting standards right at the base of the pyramid, and so we have to revisit those standards right across pretty much the whole of the institution about education standards, awards, what membership means, ethical issues, and so on. And then we need to do something about it and help upskill people, help people change and adapt and become able to meet the new standards. And that means we want to publicize, give guidance, and so on, best practice. But more than that, and perhaps moving to territory we're less familiar with, is help connect up the practice. It looks like I haven't got much time. The practice of structural engineering is across the whole globe, and finally to become more influential. On that basis, individual engineers, we believe we need to help become more influential, not be the quiet voice of respectability. Yes, Mr. Architect will help you do what you want to do, but actually we need to advise you what needs to be done. And so this is a two-way collaboration of helping each other. And it means at every level. So it's not just down at the tip of the pyramid there, technically getting things right, but right at the top, becoming more influential with our clients, and this issue of maybe building nothing, or certainly maybe looking at how we can reuse our existing building stock. Certainly I would agree, it's an area that structural engineers can get very passionate about. Just working on embodied carbon is very important, but if you start to look at the data, even if you work on highly efficient buildings and very careful choice of building materials that are currently available, you cannot get to zero. But we are helping the profession by setting out guidelines now, professionalizing the understanding of embodied carbon, which, believe me, it's not as easy as it sounds. And starting to give really serious guidance to structural engineers. But I want to get to the final slide just to say that this is something that we need to work together with architects, with building services engineers, with all the professionals at every level, at every stage of the plan of works, including -1. I can't remember whether I made that up or whether -1 does exist. But it's about influencing, and structural engineers also, with architects, being able to influence the very, very early decisions, almost to avoid something unnecessarily becoming a building project, and then working up the chain. Ultimately, of course, we need to be the technically capable people who can understand how to reduce and minimize carbon in what does get built. So a recognition that we all need to do that together. There's no way that an individual discipline of engineers or architects can do that on their own. And I do think we need to listen to each other more. I know in my career we've exchanged and we've collaborated. I'm not sure we've always heard each other quite well enough. We need to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't ask you any direct questions because we're running so far behind time, and we have a panel here who are a lot more expert than me, ready to fire questions away. So let's start with Lucy Bruzzone, who's Programme Director for the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Is that Polly's lot? Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind standing so people over there could see you, and just, well, stand where you are, that's by all means, and just some thoughts as to what you've heard.
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed to everyone who's just presented. It was fantastic to hear all of the plans and to see sort of collaboration in action. I think there were a few things that stood out to me, so I'll try and rapidly run through those. First of all, I want to congratulate CABE, who started off saying they're going to get their own house in order first. So I think whilst it's really critical that you collaborate, you also need to ensure that you are delivering and following what you say as well, so working out what you're going to be doing. And I think what we heard from everyone was around embedding the need to drive forwards a net zero future into standards and practice, which was hugely important. I think this question around value as well, we often, across all industries, consider value from a monetary perspective, but needing to change our approach to value, thinking about the wider societal value, thinking about how we're valued as individuals working on projects, as professional member institutions, and how you are actually being able to demonstrate and talk about this value that you're creating beyond just the hours that you've worked. And that came through in the early presentations too. One of the things that I wanted to perhaps challenge some of the presenters about was the time frame that you're working to. So there were a number of you that said what you are already doing, and then there were also aspirations. So what I think I'd like to see the language move from what we need to do towards what we will and what we are doing, and really hear that happening now with the urgency that we require. One of the other aspects that I think was really interesting to pull out was the challenge that we're facing, and actually, do we need to build things anymore? Do we need to look at things differently? And recasting the challenge. I think there's what we see in the education programs with the businesses that we work with at the Institute, is that actually often innovation comes from setting bold challenges and having to look at things differently. Many of our member organizations, when we say, oh, well, you'll need to cut by 10%. They say, that's fine, we can do that within business as usual. But if you say you need to go to zero, that's when the real innovation comes forward. And that's where you're able to really develop the opportunities that you need. I think one of the other aspects, so I work within our education teams. I'm working with senior business leaders across built environment professions, but also wider sectors. And we've been talking about needing to educate and build capacity at all levels, and I think that's absolutely crucial. I think what's important is to bring along our future leaders, but equally to think about those existing leaders, those that are already working on projects, that are decision makers. How are you as professional institutions really ensuring that your CPD is mandatory and aligned with this agenda? The memberships that your people are to become a member, you're actually mandating these changes. So challenges that are being set are not just challenges, but they're actually becoming mandated as part of your membership, so that when someone sees that sign on a building or a project, they really know what that means, what the public knows what that means in terms of quality and standards. And then I think it's in terms of the leadership skills that are required. We often talk about sort of technical skills and trying to work out what the technical challenges are. But I think, as the RIBA mentioned, actually many of these situations, we already have the technologies that are required. And it's really the leadership and the decisions that we take now that are going to determine the future that we're able to deliver. So helping people to actually understand the systems in which we operate, helping individuals to understand where they sit in the value chain, how all of you as professional bodies actually interact with each other, and rather than staying within your professional silos, getting out and communicating and really understanding the value chain. and understanding the whole system so that when you're taking a decision, you can make it within that context. And then building the skills to actually talk to this. So some of the softer skills that we don't always think about, how do we actually communicate, how do we listen, how do we have dialogues, and really help to build those skills along with the more technical, harder skills that we're traditionally focused on.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Rachel Hay from the Committee on Climate Change, Buildings Analyst.
Yeah, so again, just want to thank you for having me here, but also...
Sorry, are we hearing her okay at the back? Yes,
yeah?
no? Gentleman in pink scarf, can you hear her? Yes, no?
Okay, I'll speak up a bit. But thank you very much for having me here today, and also to the organisations that have been kind of brave enough to come forward and set out their plans on what is a really kind of challenging issue. I guess I don't really need to expand on the fact that this is an incredibly important, not only moral obligation, but legal obligation that we need to meet, and that the science obliges us to face. I guess one thing, picking up on a point that Lucy made, is about the urgency and the timetable. You know, we've got targets set here for 2050. That risks people interpreting it as something that's a long way off, but it's not. And this year really is the absolutely critical make or break year for climate action. What we do over the next year, but also over the next decade, will fundamentally determine whether or not we succeed or fail in the next 30 years. So we need to move out of the phase of saying, as you were saying, what we will do, and saying, this is our plan of action, these are the things that we need to change, and this is how we're going to do it. The other thing to say is that a lot of the challenges we face, no more so than buildings particularly, is that it has to be coordinated action. If we're going to retrofit and build new homes in the way that we need to do them, you have to do that holistically. You have to think about adaptation alongside mitigation. And that's why getting the professional institutions to come together to think holistically about how the problem is to be solved is absolutely critical. I think it's really fantastic that we have this rich kind of history of chartership and professional institutions in the UK, and I think it provides a huge opportunity to deliver what we need to deliver. We've already heard from some of the speakers that they have explicit roles to promote and deliver excellence in their fields, to work in the public benefit. Well, climate change absolutely necessitates action on those fronts, and I think that those obligations kind of set the framework for what needs to be done and the urgency of doing it. I think we've been really encouraged that we're starting to see further steps from the professions to play a fuller role in solving the problem. It's great that we're seeing widespread acceptance of the need to act here, the need to act urgently, but also the need to work together to produce the right outcome. We've heard today about quite a bit of work, including kind of past work in the area that people like the RTPI have done. We've also heard from individual institutions like the RIBA on kind of climate challenge and plans of action that they're setting out, and it's fantastic to see first steps here. With a lot of these, there is much further that we need to go, but it's fantastic to be making those first steps and doing it. It's also been great to hear about how actual requirements will change in terms of what the expectations on chartered professionals will be, the fact that they will be subject to kind of disciplinary action if they don't consider things as they should, which is, you know, as it should be. I think from our perspective, the main thing I want to say is to urge kind of further and more concerted progress. We need really bold, far-reaching, and also sometimes difficult decisions to be taken. And I think there's some work to do to get to grips with those difficult decisions and to be bold enough to actually make them. The first thing is that the reforms and commitments that are made have to be grounded in the evidence regarding the measures that are needed and the level of ambition that must be reached. And as we've set out in a number of our reports, the key to decarbonising direct emissions from buildings is energy efficiency and low carbon heat. And there is sometimes a tendency for low carbon heat particularly to be left behind and forgotten, and tendency to focus on on-site generation and kind of offsetting. We need to acknowledge that whilst that is, you know, in many ways easier to do, it doesn't fundamentally deliver what we have to deliver. We have to have low carbon heat and energy efficiency in our buildings if we're to decarbonise them. Fantastic to do the additional things on top, but they must be additional. And grounding the evidence means that some of the reforms that are needed won't necessarily be easy to do. They might be difficult to do and they might be unpopular. We need a plan of action for the whole professional sector that maps responsibilities, but also every institution must set out their own plan with specific actions that they are committing to do. Each institution will rely on other institutions doing their bit to make the first one be able to achieve their aims. So a really good example of that I wanted to bring up is...
Sorry, we don't have time for specifics. I'm really sorry. If you could wind up, that would be great.
Okay. Yes, I was just going to talk about property valuation being a linchpin in all of this, and that we really need to hear from RICS what the commitment is going to be to properly valuing properties. And we must have a sufficiently ambitious timetable, which I think I've mentioned before, so I don't need to expand on. But we should see the professional institutions going faster than government, not looking to government to set the pace.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Sarah Ratcliffe from the Better Buildings Partnership. Sarah, we're running terribly short of time. So
okay, I'm going to talk really fast.
Or even slowly, but less. But that either would be good.
Okay, so again, thanks to everyone for presenting your plans. Really good to hear about all of those. Emphasise the need to move from acknowledging the issue to acting. I won't talk any more about that. Some key points. First of all, integration. So sustainability, climate change needs to be integrated across all the work that you're doing in professional institutions. I'd like to see more of that. Don't want to see any sustainability add-ons. We want to see it integrated. Secondly, like to see more work with universities to look at graduates and postgraduates and ensuring the professional institutions are working with those to bring the next generation forward with those skills ready to deliver those professional competencies. I was quite interested in a point from Cabe on professional negligence. Maybe we can hear a little bit more about that and what you're actually planning to do. What is negligent? So, okay, great. Second point, existing buildings. No mention of that, hardly at all today. A lot of what you've all spoken about is new buildings, new build standards, how we're going to integrate this. Very, very little mention of existing buildings. 80% of the buildings we need in 2050 already exist. Less than 1% of buildings in new stock here in the UK every year. We need professional institutions to engage with those existing buildings, particularly if difficult choices are going to be made about whether or not to actually build new. So really important point, big gap there. Informing the market. We've already heard about the importance of other organisations there. I would like to see much more engagement with owners and occupiers. Those are the people that drive the market, so where are the institutions on that? Engagement with organisations like the Green Property Alliance, but also with CIBC, with the facilities managers, those people who manage those existing buildings. Question of valuation is critical. I'd like to see RICS somewhere in this. Advocacy. I visited the Climate Architects Network stand before. Two things. They had these little confession cards, and they were all about climate change and confessions. They tended to be either personal, i.e. I haven't gone vegan yet, or professional. Lots of professional guilt from architects building buildings that actually didn't conform to the standards they would like to. So let's see more advocacy towards with clients there. And finally, just a point on a specific point on capacity investment. We've heard some really great plans about what you're going to do. I'd like to see more specifics on that. Exactly how you're going to deliver this. What professional competency frameworks are you going to deliver? What resources are you going to dedicate to that, and what investment are you going to make to help upskill the industry? And finally, one point about the fragmented industry that we work in. It was all really great that you presented your plans today. Really happy to hear that. Particularly happy to see people like REBA and ICE working together. There's not enough time, a lot to do. We need to see more examples of collaboration across our fragmented industry.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I think a round of applause suggests that that is probably the biggest take-home message from this afternoon. Lastly, and not least, Sam Hunter-Jones, who is a lawyer with the green legal firm Client Earth.
very much. I'm going to be really quick, and I'm going to start by echoing everything that my fellow responders have said. I'm going to hopefully give you a useful perspective from a lawyer working on climate change, looking at these issues of private governance and professional code setting. I think it's incredibly important to have these new targets, rules, and processes in place. It's an essential first step, but it's also really important to have the right institutional setup and resources to enforce those and to essentially make them credible. That's an issue that we frequently come up against in our work as environmental lawyers, where we are trying to fill damaging gaps in legal capacity and enforcement. So the message is that really, no matter how strong a rule or a target is, you also need to have a credible means of enforcing it for it to be effective. The point was made earlier about having a whole systems approach. That's really important. It's really important to have rules and procedures that promote good practice and are enabling, but it's also really important to think really seriously about those rules and procedures that are blocking positive action or having a chilling effect. And I think it was mentioned about viability assessment just now, and also earlier from IC about business models. And I think it's not always possible to fix those problems, but it is important to try to mitigate those pressures as far as possible. And I think the point was made earlier as well by, I think, Kate, about keeping the system under review and having a proper system of targets and near-term outcomes. And that was very clear from Reba's presentation. But I think it's also very clear that we need to be transparent and honest about the long-term challenges too, so that we don't lose sight of where we're actually having to get to, because that's going to inform what we do in the short term. So in terms of buildings, we need to have an approach that tries to get to zero emissions embodied carbon by 2050 if we're going to be able to solve this challenge in a sustainable way. And so the discussion about refurb and new build was interesting, but I think actually it's a distinction without a difference, because what we need to do is we're going to have to be building differently and in new places to be climate resilient and to be resilient to the effects of climate change that are already locked in. So it's not enough just to refurb in a way that's zero carbon. We also have to build in a way that's zero carbon. And it's encouraging to see that a message, I think, is there in the plans, but it would be good for them to be front and center in those, as a context, those short-term targets too.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you for being so succinct. It means we're finishing nearly on time. I mean, that was a really dense session, loads and loads and loads of information. It will be, I think, available on video at some point. Is that right? I think it'll be available on video, so if people want to go back, they can listen to it. But for me, as the chair, the really clear point that you've started collaborating, you need to go an awful lot further and a lot faster. Look, a lot of speakers, please let's thank them all.